Let me ask you something. Have you ever given someone everything, your love, your trust, your security, and then watched them treat it like a burden? This is not just a sad story. It's a revenge story, but not the kind you scream about. This is the quiet kind, the kind where a mother learns that even after a lifetime of giving, sometimes you still get erased. I was 72 the day I moved back into the house I had given my son. Not rented, not loaned, given. My name is Elaine Walker. I'm a retired school treasurer, a widow, and a mother of one, or at least I used to think so. 5 years ago, I handed my son Greg the deed to our family home as a wedding gift. He was just starting out, working in real estate. He and Allison had been living in a cramped apartment with a leaky ceiling and noisy upstairs neighbors. I remember that apartment clearly. Paper-thin walls, hand-me-down furniture, and a view of a gas station. He'd bring me photos every week of listings they couldn't afford. I'd see the disappointment in his face, even when he tried to joke about it. They weren't asking for help. That's what made it harder to watch. So one Sunday, I invited him to the diner off Main Street, the one we used to go to when he was in Little League. I brought the deed in a manila envelope and slid it across the table. He looked at it like it was radioactive. "Mom, what is this?" "It's the house. It's yours." "But why?" I told him the truth, that I had sold the rest of Charles's farmland the year before, that the money was just sitting there, and that after Charles died, the house had felt too big, too empty. I told him I didn't want to live alone forever, that someday when my knees gave out or the world got too fast, I'd like to come back. Not as a guest, I said, as your mom, in my own home. I didn't make him sign anything. I didn't need a contract. I had his eyes, his tears. He reached across the table and held my hands like he did when he was little and couldn't fall asleep during storms. "I promise, Mom, you'll always have a place with me. Always." I believed him. The day they moved in, I baked 2 apple pies from scratch and left them on the counter. I stocked the fridge with Allison's favorite oat milk and Greg's weird brand of protein water. I made the bed in the master room with fresh sheets. Then I left my key on the table and closed the door behind me. It was a good kind of sad. The kind where you're crying, but it's warm, like you've done something that matters. Over the next few years, I lived in a modest senior apartment complex about 20 minutes away. It was small but cozy. I had my plants, my knitting, and my Tuesday crossword nights. Every Sunday, I'd go over for dinner. Greg would grill something on the back patio. Allison would set the table with those stone plates I never liked, but never said anything about. We laughed. We reminisced. And every time I visited, I felt proud. That house looked better in their hands. They renovated the floors, put in new windows, and even built a tiny deck in the backyard. It felt alive again. Sometimes I worried they were spending too much, but Greg would always wave me off and say, "Don't worry, Mom, this house is our foundation. It's where everything good starts." I held on to that line more than I care to admit. Then came the fall, literally. I slipped on the wet tile in my own bathroom and fractured 2 small bones in my knee. It wasn't dramatic, but the doctor told me I couldn't be alone for the next 3 months. Greg drove me to his house that same night. He opened the guest room door and said, "You'll stay here, just for now." I smiled, limped in, and unpacked my things slowly, carefully, like I was borrowing a hotel room. But in my heart, I told myself, this is okay. This was always the plan. This is home. The first week was easy. Allison made me chamomile tea every night. Greg installed handrails in the bathroom. I felt taken care of. But something small changed, and then something bigger. Greg stopped calling me Mom and started saying Elaine more. Allison asked if I could give them a heads up before using the kitchen. The thermostat got turned down, then back up, then locked. I brushed it off, told myself not to be difficult. But late one night, I sat in the dark guest room, knees aching, phone untouched, silence thick around me, and thought, why do I feel like a guest in the house I gave them? I didn't know it yet, but that question would only get louder, and soon it would break something inside me that I didn't think could be broken. But for now, I just tucked in the blanket a little tighter and told myself it was temporary. It started with a piece of paper, just a plain white envelope slipped under my door early one morning. I just finished pouring my coffee and was reaching for the creamer when I heard it, the soft slide across the hardwood. At first, I thought it was a flyer. We get them all the time in that neighborhood. Lawn service, realtors, political stuff. But when I bent down and picked it up, I saw my name typed in bold letters. Elaine Walker. No mom. No return address. My chest tightened. I opened it slowly, carefully, like it might explode. And in a way, it did. Inside was an invoice, a formal rent notice. $250 due by the 5th of the month. Occupant, Elaine Walker. Not mom. Not even guest. Just occupant. There was a breakdown of utilities, a list of shared resources, a note at the bottom that said, guest privileges suspended pending payment, and below all of that, in blue pen, Gregory Walker. I read it 3 times, thinking it had to be some mistake. Maybe it was automatic. Maybe Allison had filed something weird for taxes. But then I saw Greg's signature. I sat down at the kitchen table with the letter shaking in my hands. My stomach dropped. Not like panic, more like gravity suddenly changed and pulled me through the floor. I remember whispering out loud, just once, "What is this?" Greg came home that evening like it was any other Tuesday, dropped his keys in the bowl, kicked off his shoes, didn't even look in my direction. I stood in the hallway, holding the invoice like it had weight. "Greg," I said softly, "can we talk?" He glanced at the paper in my hand and let out a sigh. Not guilty, not nervous, just annoyed. "I figured we should be clear about things moving forward," he said, walking past me toward the fridge. I followed him. "Clear about what? What is this?" He grabbed a soda from the fridge, popped it open, and said, "Utilities have doubled, Mom. It's not personal. I just can't carry everything." I blinked. "Greg, this is the house I gave you." He didn't flinch. "That was 5 years ago. Things change. You said you'd only be here temporarily." He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't sit down. He didn't look at me like his mother. He looked at me like a tenant. No, like a problem. I felt something in my chest clench so hard it hurt. I said quietly, "Do you remember what I said when I gave you this house?" He rolled his eyes and muttered, "You said a lot of things." "I said when I couldn't live alone anymore, I'd come back. That was our agreement." Greg shrugged. "You didn't sign anything." I could feel my body turning cold. "I didn't think I had to," I said. He walked away, just walked off, like that conversation didn't even require closure, like I was background noise. That night, I didn't eat. I just sat in the guest room, my room, and stared at the walls. I thought of every lunch I packed him, every time I sat in a folding chair at his games, every bill I paid, every night I stayed up when he had the flu, every time I worked overtime to make Christmas happen, and I thought, so this is what it amounts to, a $250 invoice and the slow, cold erasure of everything I used to mean. Let me pause for a second. If you've ever been through something like this, not exactly this, but something that made you feel like your love was forgotten, I'd really like to hear from you in the comments. Maybe you've been that silent provider who got pushed aside. Tell me, when was the moment you realized your sacrifices were invisible? You don't have to write a novel, just 1 or 2 lines. Sometimes just naming it is enough. The next morning, things got colder, literally. The thermostat was locked. I tried to raise it just a few degrees and got a code error. I found out later that Allison had set a password for the smart system and didn't share it with me. That afternoon, I went to heat up soup in the microwave, and it beeped at me. Access denied. Apparently, it had been programmed into their phone app. Allison said it was to control energy use. She said it so sweetly, like I was a well-meaning burden, like a child playing with buttons she shouldn't touch. The next Sunday, they had friends over for brunch. I wasn't invited. I stayed in my room, listening through the wall as laughter floated in from the dining room. At one point, I heard Allison's voice say, "We're staging the house next month. Might do short-term rentals." Another voice asked, "But your mother-in-law lives here. right?" Allison laughed. "Just for now. We're figuring things out." Just for now. I felt like furniture, a placeholder. I thought about leaving, but then I thought, no, this is still my home. Even if they want to rewrite history, still, I packed a small bag, just in case. Just in case things got worse. Just in case the woman who gave everything. I used to think the worst kind of pain was loud, a scream, a betrayal that cracked like thunder. I was wrong. The worst pain is the kind that creeps in quietly, like when someone erases you piece by piece without ever raising their voice. That's what happened to me. And the worst part? It didn't even feel like war. It felt like housekeeping. A week after Greg handed me that rent notice, I started noticing small things disappearing. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful. My reading glasses were missing from the nightstand. The framed photo of Charles and me at our 30th anniversary was gone from the dresser. A quilt my sister had made for me, one I kept folded at the foot of the bed, vanished. I asked Allison if she'd moved anything during cleaning. She smiled and said, "Oh, I thought you'd want a less cluttered look in here. I'm simplifying the space." Simplifying. I nodded, said thank you, and felt my stomach drop. It wasn't just stuff. It was my history, my scent, my presence, and it was being peeled away like wallpaper. A few days later, I noticed a set of laminated cards on the kitchen table, staging notes. Neutral palette, remove personal items. Fresh linens, keep guest space anonymous. Allison was getting the house ready for Airbnb listings. They hadn't said a word to me, not one. I confronted Greg that evening after dinner. Well, after their dinner. I hadn't been invited. I just made myself toast and ate it alone in the guest room. "Are you renting the house out?" I asked, keeping my tone even. Greg sighed like I was a nuisance. "We're just considering short-term options. With how expensive things are," I cut him off. "Greg, I live here." He looked at me like that was an inconvenience. "It's not personal, Mom. You've had time to figure something out." That sentence hit harder than any slap. You've had time to figure something out. As if I was some drifter who'd overstayed her welcome. Not the woman who paid off that mortgage. Not the woman who handed him this house with trembling hands and a heart full of hope. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every moment from the last few months. Every chill in the room, every locked thermostat, every forced smile, every echo of Elaine instead of Mom. Around 2 a.m., I got up and went to the bookshelf in my room. Not to read, but because something had been bugging me for days. One of the books looked off. Not out of place, just disturbed. I pulled it out. Behind it was a small black object, a tiny lens no bigger than a dime, tucked neatly into the corner of the shelf. A camera. I froze. I checked the wall socket nearby. A tiny black cord disappeared behind the shelf. My hands started shaking. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I checked the closet, then the vent, then behind the lamp. I found 2 more, all pointed toward the bed, all well hidden, all recording, and for how long I didn't know. I sat down on the floor and stared at my shaking reflection in the mirror. I whispered, "They're watching me," and I couldn't even cry. Tears felt too loud for that moment. It wasn't about privacy anymore. It was about invisibility. I wasn't a person in this house. I was a risk, a liability, a squatter being quietly documented for removal. The next morning, I didn't say a word. I went about my routine, coffee, stretch, walk to the mailbox, but inside I was gone. There's a moment when your love for someone doesn't die exactly. It just flips from warmth to something else, something cold, not hate, just absence. Like when you turn off a lamp that's been flickering too long. I drove to a nearby parking lot and sat in my car with the heat on low. I pulled out an old notebook from my purse and wrote one sentence. "They're not trying to push me out with anger. They're doing it with silence." That's when I knew this wasn't a fight I could win by talking. I had to document everything. Because if they could erase me this quietly, I needed proof I was ever here at all. Later that week, I overheard Allison on a call in the hallway. She was standing right outside my door, clipboard in hand. "Yeah, the room's almost ready. No, she won't be an issue. We've got a plan. I didn't move. I just listened. We've got a plan. It echoed in my chest like thunder in a valley. That evening, I went through every drawer I had left. I found an old USB recorder I used to use for voice memos when Charles was sick. I charged it overnight. Then I waited. The next day, I approached Allison in the kitchen while Greg was at work. I asked her casually, "So, any updates on the house staging?" She smiled too quickly. "Just some light prepping." I pressed gently, "Do I need to be gone by a certain date?" She paused, then said, "We assumed you were leaving soon. It's not personal." I clicked the recorder on in my pocket. "Is this your idea?" I asked. She didn't answer at first, then said, "Greg and I made the decision together." And when I stayed silent, she added, "We just didn't think you'd fight back." That's the moment I knew. They were counting on me to vanish, quietly, like dust in sunlight. But I wasn't going to vanish. Not this time. Not without reminding them who built this house in the first place. And not without taking back what little they hadn't already erased. Was about to be given nothing. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who needed proof to justify love. But here I was, a 72-year-old woman, sitting in the front seat of my car in a Walgreens parking lot with 3 hidden cameras in a grocery bag and a USB recorder tucked in my coat pocket. The sun had just set. That soft blue hour when the world goes quiet and everything feels more honest. And I thought to myself, I can't believe it came to this. Not after everything I'd done. Not after everything I gave. When I got home that night, I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the driveway, engine off, lights out, just staring at the house. It used to feel like home. Now it looked like someone else's listing on Zillow. The paint was newer, sure. The lawn was nicer, but it didn't feel like mine. Not anymore. And as much as I hated to admit it, maybe that was the point. Maybe that's exactly how they wanted it to feel. I backed out slowly and drove across town to the storage unit I hadn't opened in nearly a decade. The one with all of Charles's old things. Tools, tax files, Christmas decorations no one had touched in years. It smelled like dust and gasoline and time. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, just that there had to be something, anything, to remind me I wasn't crazy, that I didn't imagine the promise Greg made, that I didn't just hand over my life for nothing. And then I saw it. A black metal box, tucked behind an old weed trimmer and a broken radio. I dragged it into the hallway, knelt down, even though my knees screamed at me, and opened it. Inside were documents, property records, appraisals, and then, near the bottom, a thin folder marked Maggie, just in case. Charles always called me Maggie when he was serious. My throat tightened. I opened the folder and found a letter, written in his blocky, patient handwriting. "Elaine, if you're reading this, then something didn't go the way we hoped. I know you believe in people. You always have. That's your greatest strength, and sometimes your biggest risk. This house wasn't just a gift. It was a legacy. If Greg ever forgets that, this letter might help remind him." Attached to it was a draft contract, unsigned but dated, stating that the house was to be transferred to Greg as a gift with one verbal condition, that I, Elaine Walker, would retain lifetime residency, non-revocable, unless I chose to leave on my own. I sat there in that cold hallway, blinking at the page through a blur of tears. Charles knew. Even back then, he knew this day might come, and in his quiet way, he left me something stronger than anger. He left me the truth. I don't know how long I sat there holding that paper. Could have been 10 minutes. Could have been an hour. All I know is that when I finally stood up, I wasn't the same woman who knelt down. The grief was still there. The heartbreak. The quiet betrayal that stung like salt water in an old wound. But now there was something else underneath it. Not revenge. Not fury. Resolve. The kind of resolve that comes when you realize that being silent didn't protect you. It only made you easier to ignore. The next morning, I called Marcia from church. She was the kind of woman who always wore pearls and knew 3 attorneys by first name. She gave me a number, Michael Crane, estate lawyer, mid-40s, no nonsense but kind. When I walked into his office, I had the cameras in my bag, the draft letter from Charles in a manila folder, and that same ache in my chest that never quite let go. He didn't talk much at first, just listened. When I finished, he tapped his pen once, then asked, "You gave your son the house with a verbal promise that you could stay for life, and now he's trying to charge you rent and quietly move you out?" "Yes." "And you have this draft from your late husband, plus audio of your daughter-in-law admitting intent?" I nodded. He leaned back and said, "It's not airtight, but it's something, and sometimes that's all we need to start." He called it a constructive trust, a legal concept where the court acknowledges that while a gift was made, the intent behind it matters more than the ink. He also mentioned something else, elder abuse. Not physical, not loud, but the kind that comes in neglect, manipulation, and quiet erasure. I had never put that label on it before, but when I did, it felt like someone turned on a light in a dark room. I wasn't just hurt, I was used. Michael looked at me, steady and calm, and said, "Elaine, you're not powerless, you're not crazy. You're a woman who gave everything, and now you're drawing a line." I didn't cry, not then. But when I got back in my car, I whispered to myself, "Thank you, Charles." Because for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was slipping. I felt like I had a grip on something solid. That night, I packed my things, not to leave, but to get ready. Because something in me had changed, something deeper than anger, something quieter than revenge. I didn't want to destroy anyone. I just wanted to be seen, to be remembered, to reclaim the space I had built, not with money, but with love. And if they thought I'd go quietly, well, they never really knew me at all. When I was younger, I thought strength meant raising your voice. But now I know better. Real strength doesn't scream. It doesn't slam doors or throw punches. It stands up quietly. It shows up in silence. It lives in the woman who refuses to disappear, even when everything and everyone tries to erase her. I met with Michael, my lawyer, 2 days after finding Charles's letter. I walked into his office with a manila folder full of everything. The draft agreement photos of the cameras, printouts from the rental site Allison had bookmarked on the shared iPad, and the audio recording of Allison saying, "We didn't think she'd fight back." Michael read everything carefully, flipping pages like they were fragile. When he finished, he leaned back and said, "This is enough to file. Not enough to guarantee a win, but enough to make them sweat." We filed under constructive trust and elder exploitation, citing breach of verbal agreement, undue influence, and violation of privacy. I asked him what to expect. He was honest. "It's going to get uglier before it gets better." And it did. A week later, I got a text from Greg. "I can't believe you're doing this to your own son." No apology, no recognition of what he'd done, just blame. I stared at the message for 5 minutes. Then I deleted it. No reply, no reaction, no more giving him the benefit of the doubt. I moved into a small month-to-month apartment 3 towns over. Nothing fancy, 1 bedroom, cream walls, a kitchenette that smelled like lemon cleaner. But it was mine. I unpacked the box with Charles's letter and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Not out of view, just protected. That first night in the new place, I made myself a grilled cheese sandwich and ate it on the couch while the news played in the background. It was the first time in weeks I'd eaten without my stomach turning. Meanwhile, Michael kept me updated on every move they made. Greg's lawyer filed a motion to dismiss the case, calling me a disgruntled guest with no legal grounds. We countered with testimony, the draft agreement, and photos of the cameras. We weren't just proving I'd been wronged. We were proving I had never stopped being part of that house, even when they tried to ghost me from it. Then came mediation. Greg and Allison showed up dressed like they were going to a business pitch. Greg wore his usual smug expression. Allison had a leather portfolio and her professional voice on. They offered me $30,000 to walk away. I didn't even blink. Michael leaned forward and asked, What happens if she refuses? Greg shrugged. We'll take it to court, but no one wins that way. That's when Michael pulled out a printout, a listing of the Airbnb photos taken 2 weeks earlier with timestamps and metadata. They both froze. Allison's voice cracked when she said, "That's not what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. They were already monetizing a house I was still living in. The mediator ended the session early. "This is better handled in court," she said. And I agreed. But something changed in me after that day. Not bitterness, not vengeance, just clarity. I wasn't going to win by shouting. I was going to win by enduring. So I went back to the apartment and started rebuilding, not my case, but myself. I bought a secondhand rocking chair and placed it by the window. I brought out my knitting needles for the first time in years and started making blankets again. Not for anyone else, but just to feel my hands do something that wasn't survival. I started going to a small women's group at a local community center, mostly widows, mostly quiet. But the second I told my story, they leaned in like they already knew the ending. One woman, Ruth, whispered, "You're not alone. My son tried to take my annuity behind my back." Another said, "Mine moved me in and stopped speaking to me, like I was furniture." We cried. We listened. We stitched our strength together in that small room every Wednesday morning. I didn't tell Greg where I was living. He didn't ask. But that didn't matter anymore, because for the first time, I didn't need him to see me. I saw myself. I saw the woman who had built a life, raised a child, buried a husband, and still woke up every morning trying to choose kindness, even when it hurt. Then one afternoon, as I was sorting through more documents for Michael, I found a faded envelope with my name on it. Not Elaine. Maggie. It was from Charles again. A smaller letter I must have missed. Just one line written in his handwriting. "If they ever make you feel like you're just in the way, remember, you're the reason this house even exists." I held that letter against my chest and breathed in for the first time like it was safe again. Not because the fight was over, but because I remembered who I was fighting for. Not for revenge, not for pity, not even for justice, for dignity. That night, I lit a candle, turned off the TV, and sat in silence. And in that silence, I felt something shift. Not the world, not my circumstances, me. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies, not for recognition. Not for anyone to realize how much I gave. I knew what I gave. And I wasn't going to let them take that from me. Not with silence, not with signatures, not with rent notices or hidden cameras. I was done shrinking to fit their version of me. I walked up the courthouse steps in a navy blouse Charles always said made me look like I knew what I was doing. It was the same shirt I wore to his memorial, the same one I wore when I signed over the deed to Greg. And now I was wearing it one last time, not to prove a point, but to close a chapter. Michael walked beside me, calm and steady. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. He'd seen me come undone, and now he was watching me come whole. The courtroom wasn't big, but it was bright and cold. Greg sat across from me in a gray suit that looked too tight at the shoulders. Allison was beside him, flipping through papers and pretending not to look at me. The same people who once called me mom and family. Now they avoided my eyes like I was a stranger, but I wasn't angry. I just felt done. Not empty, just done. Like a book that's been read too many times, finally closed and placed on the shelf. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no time for theatrics, read the findings aloud. The house had been gifted with clear verbal expectations. The cameras, the rent notice, and the Airbnb preparation all pointed to deliberate coercion. The draft agreement from Charles was strong enough to establish original intent. The attempts to erase me were, in her words, a pattern of quiet exclusion and financial manipulation. Then she looked at me directly. "Mrs. Walker, the court recognizes your right to permanent residence. You are not a guest. You are not a burden. You are the foundation this house was built on." She granted me a life estate, full right to live in the home for the rest of my life. Greg retained ownership, but couldn't sell, refinance, or rent it while I lived there. She also ordered them to remove all surveillance equipment and pay my legal fees. And finally, she issued a written admonishment, not a punishment, but a record, a line in history that said, "You tried to erase her, she refused." I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because I had no tears left to waste on people who looked at my love and saw only leverage. I stood up, nodded politely, and walked out. Greg tried to follow. "Mom," I stopped, turned around, and for the first time in years, I looked at him without emotion. Not hate, not love, just truth. "I'm not your mom right now. I'm the woman you underestimated, and I'm walking away with more than you'll ever own." Then I turned back toward the door and didn't look back. The house was quiet when I returned. Greg and Allison had already moved out. Their furniture was gone. So were their trendy rugs, metallic light fixtures, and expensive air purifiers. All that remained was the structure I had once built from heartache and hope. And now, it was mine again. Not in name, not in deed, but in presence. The first thing I did was open the windows, let the house breathe. Then I dug out the old rocking chair from the garage, the one Charles built me when Greg was a baby. I placed it in the corner of the living room where the afternoon sun hit just right. I put back my old quilts, rehung the photo of Charles and me in the hallway, planted rosemary by the back porch like I always wanted. And then I sat, not to remember, but to begin again. Weeks passed. I didn't hear from Greg. Word got around church that he and Allison had split up, something about too much stress or different directions. I didn't ask. I didn't need to know, because I was done being part of stories that hurt me. Instead, I opened the house every Thursday to a small circle of women, mostly widows, mostly quiet, mostly tired of pretending everything was fine. We called it the front room circle, because healing shouldn't hide in back rooms. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just sat and listened. Sometimes we laughed until someone snorted tea out their nose. It was messy, but it was ours. And one morning, while pouring coffee into mismatched mugs, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see someone left behind. I saw a woman who stayed, not in the room, but in her worth. I whispered under my breath, "You made it, Maggie," and I meant it. Let me ask you something before we go. Have you ever had to reclaim something? Your voice, your place, your dignity, without raising your voice? Tell me in the comments, when was the moment you quietly stood back up for yourself? You never know who's reading your story and who might need it just to keep going. Because sometimes survival doesn't look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like a woman sitting in her own kitchen, breathing, finally.